From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Budget problems and declining enrollment lead to a shakeup this school year for students, teachers, and staff in the Wichita district. Also, the Sedgwick County Commission struggles to create rules for large-scale solar farms. But first, primary election voters narrow the field in local and state political races. We'll examine results from the hotly contested Sedgwick County Commission race on both the Republican and Democratic sides. Tonight on Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. This was primary election week across Kansas. Sedgwick County Republicans and Democrats selected their nominees for several contested races. Most were legislative contests, but it's the open seat for Sedgwick County Commission that's been getting the most attention. On the Republican side, real estate broker Stephanie Wise prevailed by about 1,000 votes over businessman and former Wichita City Councilman Greg Ferris.
I've said it from the beginning, and I'm saying it still, that property tax relief is going to come from a property tax reform. And so we have to look at the way that we are handling our property taxes, our appraisals, and linking arms with the city and the state to make sure that we're working together to give real relief to our constituents.
Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, community activist and former bank examiner Celeste Ressette defeated community volunteer Alma Ann Jones by about 1,000 votes.
The first thing I want to address with them is just sit down with the department heads and the chief financial officer, Lindsay Poe, and look at the budget with a finer tooth comb, I call it. My background is in finances, and I want to see, as I found with the city, are there any waste or duplication? What are we giving special interest? Who's getting tax abatements?
Those two will face off in November for the seat being vacated by David Dennis, who is retiring. Here to talk about the primary and some of this week's other big stories is Friends University political science professor Dr. Russell Arbin Fox. Also, Democrat State Representative Casey Hobson.
Yes.
And Leo Delperdang, State Representative on the Republican side. Thank you all three for joining us this week.
Thank you.
The primary contest, Dr. Fox, I'll open it up for you. Sedgwick County Commission is the big topic, and we have two contested races. That story that we just listened to talked about the District 5 race on the northwest side of Sedgwick County. There's also a southwest side of Sedgwick County race with Jeff Blubaugh and what will turn out to be Sarah Lopez up for grabs as well.
Right. It was a very interesting race in District 3, which it happens to be my district. Interesting because while it's not unusual nowadays with so many things having been nationalized and you get big culture war topics kind of driving the conversation, it's not unusual to have a lot of money from outside groups pouring into races. The thing is that the large amount of money that was, I mean, we're not talking about massive funds, but still, in comparison to what you would expect for a county commission race, the amount of money that poured into the fight on the Republican side really played out in a very interesting way because you didn't actually see these Republican candidates sharpening their knives and going after one another for these various culture war type issues. So the money was there, but it was there mainly in favor of fairly traditional Republican talking points. A lot of people, discussing property taxes. They're talking about home values. They're talking about all sorts of issues that are very, very relevant to the county commission, but which usually aren't tied to a lot of outside money coming in. So that was an interesting one to look at. The race between Alma Ann Jones and Celeste Ressette was also interesting because, of course, on the one hand, you have a candidate, Alma Ann Jones, who was very close to former Mayor Brandon Whipple, very integrated into the mainstream of Democratic politics within Sedgwick County, whereas Celeste Ressette had picked fights with the former mayor. She'd actually left the party, ran against him as an independent, came back to the party to run as a Democrat for this nomination. So interesting things going on both sides, though neither of them, I thought, went in to really unusual territory. Pretty much all of them stayed focused on key issues.
Yeah, and looking at strict numbers here for the primary votes, I believe when I looked at the election commissioner's website, it looked like the Republican candidate for Northwest Sedgwick County brought in about 9,000 votes. Celeste Rassett, on the other hand, only brought in about 1,500 votes. Does that mean it's going to be an automatic lock for Stephanie Wise?
It's not automatic, but I mean, obviously, it's been a Republican seat in the past. There's every reason to assume that it's going to continue to be a Republican seat. It will be interesting to see the degree to which Rassett might be able to connect with some of those Republican voters, possibly because she's kind of had, you know, a less than lockstep relationship with the Democratic Party, but also probably more importantly, just because she's known for things completely aside from partisan politics. I mean, this is a part of Wichita that skews a little bit older than other parts of Wichita. And there were a lot of people there that were really, really supportive of Rassett as she, you know, pushed for protecting Century 2. And she may be able to cruise on that a fair distance. Whether she'll be able to take it all the way to the finish line, I think is unlikely, but it's probably likelier for her than it might have been for Ms. Jones.
Yeah, and the last thing I want you to chime in about is the District 2, I believe that is, Southwest Sedgwick County. That race in November will be between Jeff Blubaugh and Sarah Lopez, and that may be a closer contest.
Probably so. I mean, again, that's a part of Wichita that at one time was much more Democratic than it is today. Sarah Lopez won that race, but only by a hair and only after they started to count the late ballots. Jeff Blubaugh obviously is well known, 8 years on the city council, and running against Sarah Lopez, who, you know, has really struck a fairly moderate tone on the Sedgwick County Commission. Famously really developed a close relationship with David Dennis and some other Republican members of the commission.
I think even received his endorsement.
So it'll be interesting to see how that one goes.
Yeah, I'll talk to the state lawmakers now. Sedgwick County, what does Sedgwick County Commission mean in Topeka? Does it have any bearing whatsoever? Is it important for you as state lawmakers how this race turns out?
Well, it's important for us. It's important for us because we actually listen to our local elected officials to actually know what's needed here on the local level for us to actually legislate. Whether this past year or year before, we actually passed the aviation tax credit, you know, that actually helped aviation industry here in Sedgwick County, and that's something that they've been pushing for a while. That actually will help aircraft workers here. It's important that, you know, we actually listen not just on the county commission level, but even at the municipalities in Sedgwick County, whether it's Wichita, Bel Air, whether it's Park City, Derby, or even Mulvane. We listen to everyone to make sure that we actually are working together to make sure we actually bring the best law, voting on the best laws that we can in Topeka. So definitely we're paying attention as to what's going on.
And Leo, I think you're on the aviation committee as well. What does it mean? What does Sedgwick County Commission or Sedgwick County politics mean in Topeka?
Well, it's interesting that KC over here brought up the tax credits from the aviation one. That's a bill I actually carried in 2017, but it didn't make it. We've been working on this for years, and it finally made it through. People are looking for tax relief out here. We're looking for property tax relief. There's just several things. I know it's a constant going back and forth between us and the county commission on the county commission appraises the properties higher, but then it's up to us to maybe set the mill levies and work on how can we counteract that. This past tax bill that we just got signed by the governor actually gave for property taxes a $75,000
rebate?
Not rebate, but it was exemption is the word.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, $75,000 exemption on there, which is going to help some. But what do we do in the future? These tax appraisals keep going up and up and up. And I shouldn't say taxes, the appraisals do, and the taxes are tied to it. There's got to be a way to fix this thing.
And politicians like to say, well, we didn't raise taxes, but even though the value as our residents are paying
how
more
much
in
did you pay for your same property tax last year versus this year?
Yeah.
I look at my own place where I live. When we first moved there 33 years ago, as most people, I had a mortgage on it. We had taxes and insurance and all that. What I paid on that, including the mortgage. The house is now paid off completely, but I'm still paying that because the appraised value went up so much that my insurance and my taxes and so forth just kept on going with it. We never owned the house.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how those two races for Sedgwick County Commission turn out in November. And speaking of the Sedgwick County Commission, this week it once again postponed a decision on rules for large-scale solar energy farms. Cake's Jocelyn Schifferdecker shows us why.
A hot topic at the Sedgwick County Commissioners meeting Wednesday morning.
In the clean energy moratorium, accept MAPC's recommendation.
I like to drive down the road and look across the horizon and see that I would not.
Farmers struggle every day to be able to make a living.
As the county has a big decision to make.
This discussion around energy diversification I think is interesting, it's intriguing.
What rules and regulations will solar energy conversion systems in the county need to follow?
The feedback from our 20 cities I think is important. That's also a tough balance. These private property rights and our farmers that are having difficulties in economic times, water usage, all of these things matter.
County commissioners were set to vote on the solar energy plan created by the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission last year. But first, it had an auditor present a few possible changes to that plan.
The recommendation was to consider whether it is preferred or necessary to more directly address acceptable and unacceptable aspects and impacts of solar energy conversion systems relative to design, siting, location, size, and scale.
One note the consultant company had was to make it where solar energy projects can't be built within 2 miles of each other.
Aye.
Commissioner Lopez, aye. Chairman Beatty.
Aye.
Commissioners decided they need more time to go over these possible changes, saying they still have questions and they want to know what the public thinks.
They're just seeing this for the first time as well. There's some new ideas in here that have not been talked about.
And Leo, I'll start with you. This, as Commissioner Beatty mentioned it, this comes down largely to property rights. We have landowners who want to sell their property to developers who want to make a buck, but we have other neighbors who object because it thinks these developments will lessen their property rights. From a state level, what does this mean?
Okay, well, let me start with whether it's solar, wind, gas, nuclear, the very hydro, etc. Those are known as generation facilities. They're not the transport, they are the generating facilities. Generating facilities are not subject to eminent domain. So it is up to, as you said, if I want to put up a solar farm, I've got to go out to the farmer, negotiate with him, and it's up to that farmer whether he wants to lease it, sell it, whatever it is. Now you're dealing with the neighbors around the area. I am a proponent of all the above. I mean, we cannot, I'm good with wind, I'm good with solar, the green energies. We have to have a backup plan. You have to have dispatchables. For example, you've got Evergy that's going to be working on a natural gas plant over in Hutchinson. We worked on the bill earlier this year to make that happen. That has its place in this realm here. Where I've got an issue is specific in Sedgwick County is if we're going to put a 1 section or a 2 section, I believe the commission has it open to 1,280 acres. That's 2 sections of land. That's 2 square miles. Now, if you're going to take prime land that's in the middle of a neighborhood or a development, I got an issue there. There was one they were looking at out toward the Mays area, but yet I talked to the superintendent of the Mays schools, and it sounded like that was the same area they were wanting to expand the schools. That makes more sense. Put the solar back to where you maybe don't have to look at it. With solar, unlike wind towers, you could put up some sort of privacy fence arrangement. You can minimize the impact there. I don't want to say pushing it out of Sedgwick County. This is not what I mean, but for me, it makes most sense to put solar farms out in western Kansas where we have to irrigate crops in order to get them to grow. Can I go to a farmer and say, I'll give you X amount either for your land or to lease your land, put up solar panels and quit taking from the aquifer for the water. Let it start replenishing a little bit. But that's just my take on it.
Leo,
go ahead.
if you don't mind me jumping in, I agree completely with you that, obviously what we need to be doing, and this is primarily a state level thing, is, find ways to get more of these generation facilities built in western Kansas. That lessens the burden on the aquifer, it makes better use of the land, and it generates energy that everybody can make use of. But as was pointed out originally by Jared, this is a property rights issue. And if you have farmers that aren't able to make a go of it and they see solar as a way for them to hold on to their land, wouldn't it actually be the case that some of the things that the commission is looking at, particularly this 2-mile proposal that came from the consultant, functionally that would push it out of Sedgwick County in all likelihood. And you said you don't want that.
No, I don't mean to, it always comes down to, I don't want it in my backyard.
Right,
That's not what I'm saying here.
My suspicion is that they brought in the consultant primarily to satiate the NIMBY types that were showing up at the meetings. And I'm just afraid that if they follow through on all that he suggested, it will end up being booted out of Sedgwick County.
I'm looking at the size of Sedgwick County. There's hundreds of thousands of acres that these places could go, but I don't want it in downtown Wichita. It doesn't belong in the middle of May School District, for example.
And I respect that, but it's just, if you say you can't have any of these within 2 miles of each other, well then, you start blocking out, potential sites, and it eventually does kind of push away.
But those are setbacks, just like they do with the wind towers. Now, unlike wind, if you put up a wind tower, everybody's got to look at it. They got to deal with it. You've got plane issues. You've got maybe farmers out there with their private runway strips that it would impede. That's not the case with solar. It's down by the ground, and you can essentially hide most of it from the neighbors. So I remember, not to change the subjects, but I remember going to the debates that we had up around Mays when the city wanted to build the Northwest sewage plant up there. And we had everybody coming out and, oh my God, it's going to ruin my property values and it's going to degrade this and it's going to be terrible. That plant went up, and you know what? I love going up there with my dog. It's got fishing lakes, it's got running trails, it's just gorgeous up there. We've got to see where the future is. I'm not going to stop the future here over questions of, well, what if?
Yeah.
All right. Good discussion. We'll move on. The Wichita School District is downsizing and has closed 6 school buildings for the new school year. But staff and teachers are keeping their jobs, thankfully, if they are willing to relocate to other facilities, that is. KSN's Zena Tarr shows us how it's working out so far.
Hundreds of teachers and support staff changing schools.
You always have the horrors of moving and things being lost that we're working through.
The union representing Wichita teachers says it can be a stressful process for educators used to their routines.
The district's been very good at making sure that they're engaged in conversation and doing what they can to make it as seamless as possible for our teachers.
Anybody that wanted to stay within the district and wanted to, they basically had the option to look on their own and find a new home, as you will, within the district.
For those who choose not to apply for specific positions in the district decided where they would go.
We were able to place 353 teachers and other support staff by June 3rd.
That means the district had to hire just a quarter of the number of new teachers they did last year, leaving only 46 teaching positions open, the lowest at a start of a school year since 2015. The numbers discussed at a school board meeting Wednesday.
Our vacancies are at least a 3-year low, if not more than that, in the para categories, in special ed, in elementary, middle, and high. Primarily middle and high looks really, really good.
There's a lot less openings across the district and more classrooms are filled with certified educators, so that's better for our students.
And Casey, I'll start with you. Our teachers, in fact, you as state lawmakers don't have much to do with these types of decisions. The state school board does, but our teachers don't get enough recognition and pay as it is, and now we force them to move. I'm thankful, as you probably are, that the Wichita School District found a way to keep their jobs and not lay off any of them.
That's correct. And well, first of all, I'm not a big fan of closing any schools because, number one, we've always talked about, well, we want smaller classroom sizes. We want, neighborhood schools around. But anytime you close down a school, you take away that. You actually, even though you actually move students to other schools, you're not actually, working towards getting down to smallest classroom sizes. So I'm just grateful that the Wichita School District was able to make sure that these teachers still have their positions and all their administrative people as well. But at the same time, we still have to do more on the state level to make sure that we are fully funding education from the state level. We talk about special ed. I think special ed is actually a mandate that's coming in from the federal government. Federal government hasn't really stepped up to that plate, and we're local school districts are taking that task. So we need to do all that we can to make sure we're fully funding it, making sure that schools are open, at the same time protecting teachers with respect to job security here in not only in our region but throughout the entire state.
Yeah. And Leo, unfortunately, with the 6 Wichita school districts that closed, we seem to see some of these school closures in lower income areas where it's tougher for these children to get to school, and now we see busing farther away from home. That's a tough call.
Yeah, and like KC, I just want to echo that. When I was small and a child, I walked to my grade school. And that's good memories. You know, it wasn't that far away. It was part of the community. You knew all the kids there. You know, you played together after hours. Now you jump on a bus and you're bussed across town. It's not an issue with the ethics or anything, but rather you and I could never see each other outside of school. You know, you live miles and miles apart. So yeah, I hate to lose that aspect of it. But what's the answer to it? You know, we've been fully funding schools. I believe the governor just put a letter out yesterday, if I remember, saying once again we fully funded the schools. But yet, this is more of an issue. I think they are losing enrollment. So the enrollment goes down, the funding goes down. What's the options here?
Yeah. Other than to raise property taxes or raise the mill levy, nobody wants that.
Or you know, 259, you know, they have this refinancing plan where they're, you know, going to try to build upon, you know, the previous bond issue, and you know, we still haven't seen all the details of that, so we don't know where it is going with that. But I mean, hopefully that will help them at least cover some of their costs.
And if we've got time, I ran some numbers. I'm not going to pull the paperwork out.
Quickly, 30 seconds.
Okay, ran some numbers. If you look at the state budgets, rather the general fund, the overall budgets, between health care and education, 2 items, in 2024, it took 88% of the overall funds, 88%. So, with that said, there are 111 different entities, and I could read them all off to you, but we won't, but there's 111 different departments, entities, whatever, vying for that 12% of the leftover funds. There's not enough money in that 12% to throw a whole bunch more at the schools. That's the issues we're up against.
All right, moving on, our last story today. Will the city of Wichita take steps to increase safety in areas where streets are temporarily closed? A court ruling last week could force that issue, as KC's Hannah King explains.
When a business applies to close a street temporarily, like a sporting event, for example, the city leaves that on the business to conduct that closure. And this case was brought after a motorcycle wreck near downtown 3 years ago. It recently went before a jury.
The jury returned a verdict in our client's favor and determined his damages were $1.7 million. We tried to resolve it with the city. The city thought it was his fault, and we had to take it to a jury trial.
This wreck is what a pair of local attorneys are hoping will change the city's street closure process.
What the jury determined was that the city of Wichita breached its duties to maintain the appropriate traffic control signals.
It was a typical June motorcycle ride for a longtime Wichitan until it wasn't in 2021.
Our client was behind a pickup truck going northbound on McLean. Through what they thought was a green light, the pickup truck observed the bollards at the last instant, slammed on its brakes.
To summarize, what attorney Dustin Devon is saying is the light was green, although there were yellow bars under it preventing cars from going through. At the last second, a truck attempted to avoid hitting those yellow poles, and the motorcycle just behind the truck tried to do the same.
Our client tried to go around the pickup truck in an emergency situation. His legs struck the bollard, and the city should have also either put the traffic lights on flashing red or completely covered the traffic signal.
Or proper advance signs, Dustin Devon says, warning of the closure before getting to that intersection. Last week, a Sedgwick County jury returned a verdict.
What they did was they determined the city of Wichita was negligent because it has a very flawed street closure process. Essentially what it's doing is shifting the burden of determining the appropriate traffic control devices and placing it on the citizens and businesses that apply for the street closure. And it can't do that. It's got the traffic engineers and it's got to adhere to its responsibilities.
We have reached out to the city of Wichita to see exactly what that road closure process looks like and if there have been any changes since the crash in June of 2021. And this is what I received from the city. The city respects and appreciates the jury's work on the case. However, we respectfully disagree with the jury's findings and are reviewing the city's options at this time.
And Dr. Fox, I'll start with you. We're talking about the baseball stadium, McLean and Maple, right in front of the baseball stadium, where they put up those bollards and closed McLean Boulevard. It does seem like someone dropped the ball here because those traffic lights were still operating normally, even though part of the intersection was closed.
I don't know a lot of the details about this case, but two things just really quickly occur to me. One, the statement from the city suggests that they're going to appeal the decision, and we're talking about, you know, someone who is injured and they're looking for liability. That's not a really great look for the city. The second thing I would want to emphasize is that we can look at this in a broader context. Cities are often strapped for funds. They are increasingly dependent upon not just the state, obviously, but also the national government. They frequently look for opportunities to essentially outsource their responsibilities. Just this week, there was a meeting of the city council where they were talking about privatizing city parks because they feel like they're too expensive to maintain. This is a much smaller budget item, but when you have responsibilities for public safety, I mean, we have the police force, we're the ones that collectively are supposed to be doing this, to kind of put it on a private entity, to put it on a private business, that's a way of dodging responsibility, frankly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are running out of time for this week, and first off, I want to thank Cake and KSN for sharing their stories with us. You can also send your comments and questions to kansasweek@kpts.org. Once again, I want to thank all three of our guests, Leo Delperdang, Casey Ohabasam, and Dr. Fox. Thanks again for helping us out on Kansas Week. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks for joining us.